He said tomorrow can be our Independence Day. So we're going to talk to Lord Monkton about that. So we have introduction, of course. If you're a listener to INFOWARS.com, you've heard him on many times. We have Lord Monkton on to talk. He is an expert on global warming. He's been very effective at fighting the lies of Al Gore and others, the censorship that we see surrounding man-made global warming narratives. He's done that in the UK. Of course, he's also a businessman. He's a newspaper editor. He's an inventor, a classical architect, and, of course, the high priest of climate skepticism. But today we're going to talk to him about what's going on with globalism. Also, if you want to find Lord Monkton, you can find him at scienceandpublicpolicy.org, where you'll find many of his papers published, and whatsupwiththat.com, where you'll find information where he exposes the lies of climate alarmism. But today we're going to talk about Brexit. We're going to talk about the economic issues. We're going to talk about the sovereignty issues. We're going to talk about the political consequences, both in Britain and in the United States, because this is a worldwide issue that is happening right now. Joining us now is Lord Christopher Monkton. Thank you for joining us, Lord Monkton.
Well, David, it's a pleasure to be with you. And my goodness, it's exciting here because I can't tell you who is going to win this vote tomorrow. I hope it's going to be the Brexiteers. I've already cast my vote by post, but it's too close to call. It could go either way. But you're quite right. In your introduction and in that wonderful film, and all of the people who you showed clips of are friends of mine, this is an enormous blow. The fact that we've even got this referendum is an enormous blow against global government power. Yeah. They didn't ever want us to have this vote. And at least we've got the chance to have our say. And it's very evenly divided between, roughly speaking, the left and the centre-right, between the establishment and the ordinary folk, between the givers and the gobblers, to use the 8 rands metric. And what is fascinating is that practically the entire global establishment, so terrified are they at the idea of Britain leaving the EU, that we've had Mr. Obama speaking out, we've had Angela Merkel, the president of Germany, speaking out, we've had, or the chancellor, she's called, we've had Francois Hollande speaking out, we've had the head of the World Bank speaking out, we've had all manner, with the head of the Bank of England, who is not allowed to speak out in political matters, he has spoken out, and all of these are, of course, wanting us to stay in because they want to tie us in to this increasingly globalized government system.
Yes, and further away, we have no control over what's going on in your lives. And I think that's the key phrase there, that rousing speech that was given by Boris Johnson, where he says, tomorrow can be our Independence Day. I mean, do Britons really want to govern themselves, or do they want to be governed by some European superstate that is dominated by the Germans? I really don't understand that. I mean, there was a back and forth talking about Neville Chamberlain, and they made a good point on that the other day when they questioned Cameron on that. I want to play that clip and get your reactions to it. But I see that as another issue of appeasement and surrender.
That is a very fair comparison. And of course, the entire establishment throughout Europe was for appeasement in the era immediately before the Second World War. And I'll bet you'll never guess which the first state to speak out against Hitler openly and publicly was.
What was that?
It was actually the Holy See. It was the Pope Pius XII, as he was to become. He was then secretary to Pope Pius XI, who issued in German an encyclical letter, the first time it hadn't been in Latin since the early Middle Ages, and it was called Mit brennender Sorge, with profound concern. The Holy See spoke out against the Hitler regime, while everybody else, the Times of London, was for appeasement. I mean, indeed, the Daily Express in 1933 had disgraced itself by running a front-page story shortly after Hitler came to power, saying Germany is Britain's friend. And the author of its lead story was not one of its journalists, it was Joseph Goebbels. That was how much the establishment wanted the German Reich to survive and prosper. And now they want the new bureaucratic, the tyranny by Clark, which again is it's not just undemocratic, it's anti-democratic. And again, the establishment, which now hates democracy, viscerally hates democracy, wants to use the EU as a model for spreading effectively dictatorship worldwide. And you're quite right, David, when you say that democracy and independence are the issue. Are we going to be, once again, a sovereign nation? Are we going to get our independence back? And when you think that Britain was a great, proud and independent nation, the last time anyone invaded us was in 1066 AD. And now here we have the European Union invading us by stealth. Yes. And of course, about half the population will tend to side with the establishment, the gobblers, the people who are on the take. They love the EU because it's a paradise of vested interests. There are 20,000 lobbyists who infest Brussels and Strasbourg, and their job is to argue for various vested interests to get free handouts from the European Union, of course, at British and other taxpayers' expense. And how much say do we get in any of this? It gets back to your point, David, about democracy and independence. At the moment, according to the House of Commons Library, which has just done a survey, 3 laws in 5 that are made for us by our Parliament in the United Kingdom are in fact only made because Brussels says we must make those laws. Wow. These laws are being enacted because the European Union's commissars, 28 unelected people who meet behind closed doors, have issued what is revealingly called a directive, which we are then obliged, under pain of unlimited and continuing fines, to enact into law in the United Kingdom. Now, the German government did a survey 5 years ago, and its conclusion, which was put in front of its constitutional court at the time, which had insisted that this sum be done, they said that in fact 5/6 of all laws, 5 laws in 6, not even 2 in 3, but 5 in 6, wow, were in fact enacted solely because directives by the unelected, unremovable, unaccountable, unquestionable commissars had ordered these laws to be made. That is how far from democracy we are. Now, you may say, oh, but I've heard of a thing called the European Parliament. Well, don't imagine that that is anything like a parliament. It is a fig leaf to cover the naked dictatorship behind. And this parliament cannot even bring forward a bill. Can you imagine if the United States had set up a constitution whereby the Congress was not allowed in either house ever to bring forward any new legislation?
We're getting close to that.
Isn't allowed. Yes, the European Parliament, of course, you are under Obama getting used to that, but that's not how it was supposed to work under the Constitution.
That's right.
And yet the Constitution of Europe is that the supreme law of Europe is proposed behind closed doors by the 28 commissars, is drafted behind closed doors by a committee called the Council of Ministers, which doesn't actually have any ministers on it. It's entirely bureaucrats. There's also a rather shadowy group called the Council of Permanent Representatives, another lot of bureaucrats that have their say. Then and only then it goes to the European Parliament. And of course, if right at the outset the commissars have decided to veto whatever law it was, then the European Parliament doesn't get its say at all. So this shows how undemocratic it is. And if the European Parliament should agree to the law proposed by the commissars, well, then it gets inflicted on us. But if they disagree, it gets inflicted on us anyway, because the commissars have and frequently exercise the right under the Treaty of Maastricht, in 5 different places it says this, to override, the unelected commissars can override the decisions of the elected Parliament of Europe. So this is an entirely anti-democratic constitution. In fact, it's very like the Soviet constitution on which it was modeled. And all that's happened is the Soviet constitution has moved westward, and we are now effectively the European Supreme Soviet.
And I would add, Lord Monkton, that what we are now looking at with the Trans-Pacific and the Transatlantic Partnership, Senator Sessions, who's one of the only senator that I know that actually looked at the agreement, has essentially said we're going to have the same thing with these trade agreements, where we're going to have an unelected, unaccountable bureaucracy that is going to be able to alter these things at will. There will be a living document, and we will have absolutely no control over them. So what you just described there in the European Union, where they can override all these deals, and of course, it's always about the money. They sell this as an economic opportunity, as an economic union, but then they use it to take our sovereignty. As Boris Johnson has said, and he's been one of the key voices on this, he says, we remain prisoners of a trade regime that will not allow this country, the fifth biggest economy on earth, to negotiate with America, China, India, or any other nation. He says that privilege is reserved exclusively for the hierarchies of the European Commission, of whose vast staff only 3.6% are British. Now, if they get this Trans-Pacific, Transatlantic partnership, that will go from 3.6% to 0% for you. It'll go to 0% for America. We will have no say over the trade issues for our countries.
That's right. Now, we now have to do something about this. Of course, in Britain, if anybody is listening to this from Britain, for heaven's sake, if you still believe in democracy, and a surprising number don't, but if you do, then for heaven's sake, you have to vote leave. It is as simple as that. Don't be fooled by all the economic arguments that the Treasury has simply made up numbers to try and say we would go bankrupt if we were out of the EU. We'll go bankrupt for sure if we're in it. Let me give you one figure that tells you just how badly Britain has done in the EU.
Hang on with that figure, Lord Monkton. We got to go to a commercial break, and we'll be right back. And we also have a clip. We'll talk about the other issue that came up in this, and of course, that is immigration. That has economic consequences, but it has vast consequences for the entire society. We'll talk about that when we come back with Lord Monkton. Brexit is tomorrow. Will it be Britain's Independence Day or the day they quietly cease to exist? We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, your host. We're going to go back to Lord Monkton. We had to go to a commercial break. He had one key factor that he wanted to tell us about with the Brexit. Of course, that's coming up tomorrow, the vote as to whether or not Britain will leave the European Union. Before we get back to Lord Monkton, I just want to let you know we do have a new special at INFOWARS.com. Deep Cleanse, 20% off at INFOWARSLife.com. This is a way to give yourself a foundation of true health by getting rid of the toxins in your body, to clean your body. You can look at the reviews on InfoWarsLife.com. We have over 100 5-star reviews. Find out what this product is about. People love this, and you can get it right now, 20% off at InfoWarsLife.com. Also, our Hillary for Prison t-shirt. Such a great design that even our enemies at Slate did a massive article on the effect that it had at a Donald Trump rally. And again, you can get these at 50% off. This is a one-week special, 50% off the first shirt and 75% off your second shirt. That's Hillary for Prison t-shirt. Let's go back to Lord Monkton. Lord Monkton, as we're going to the break, you were about to make a point. Go ahead.
Yes, it's a very simple figure about the economics of all this, which needs to be looked at very briefly. And that is that in the last 2 decades, the stock market in London has had its worst 2 decades in 650 years of operation.
Wow.
That's how well the EU has done for us. The EU has generally underperformed in the last 20 or 30 years just about all the other developed economies. And it is dragging all of us down with exactly this kind of bureaucratic mishmash of controls and regulations run by people we can't elect and can't remove that you talk of in the transatlantic trade partnership system. And what is happening here is that people like Mr. Obama, who have realized that communism is no longer popular, but who want to build in perma-communism into whatever they do, have discovered that if they make international treaties, either bilateral or multilateral, it doesn't very much matter, under your constitution, those treaties have the force of supreme law in the United States. And they can't be repealed unilaterally as your own laws can. That's the difference. And what is more, all the powers that are transferred, whether it be to the Transatlantic Trade Partnership, whether it be to the European Stability Pact, the European Union, the World Bank, the World Law of the Sea Conference, it doesn't matter which of these entities it is, the UN is another one. There are a growing number of them, all of them very expensive. Not one of these supranational or global bodies has its governing council elected by us, the people of the states parties, to the treaties that set those bodies up. So every time you transfer power from elected hands in the democracies to a global or supranational organization, you're transferring it from elected to unelected hands every time. So every time somebody says, oh, we've got a new wonderful treaty, you will know with a terrible certainty that another large piece of your democracy has been sliced away like a piece of salami. And this is the intention of the left now, is to govern entirely by dictatorship. And so far has it gone that, to give you an example, which is being mirrored in the transatlantic trade partnership, which is why I mention it to you in America.